The cold milk splashed across 7-year-old Emma's face like a cruel baptism, each drop carrying the weight of rejection that had become her daily bread. Her small hands trembled as the white liquid dripped from her dark curls onto the faded pink dress that had seen too many wash cycles, too many tears. In that moment, standing in the cramped kitchen of their rundown apartment, Emma's world crystallized into a single, devastating truth: she was unwanted, unloved, and utterly alone. "Clean yourself up, you little pest," her stepmother Chandra hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The empty milk carton hit the linoleum floor with a hollow thud that seemed to echo Emma's hollow heart. "And don't you dare cry. Your tears won't change the fact that you're nothing but a burden." Emma had learned long ago that tears only made things worse. She wiped her face with her sleeve, tasting the salt of her silent sorrow mixed with the sweetness of the spilled milk. This was her life now, had been for the 2 years since her father married Sandra and then conveniently disappeared on one of his business trips that never seemed to end. The promises he'd made about their new family, about love and happiness, had evaporated faster than morning dew. The abuse wasn't always physical. Sometimes Sandra's words cut deeper than any slap ever could. Today had been particularly brutal because Emma had dared to ask for seconds at breakfast, her growing body crying out for nourishment that was always rationed, always controlled. In Sandra's twisted world, Emma's hunger was greed, her need for affection was manipulation, and her very existence was an inconvenience. "I have to run errands," Chandra announced, grabbing her purse with the same aggression she applied to everything in Emma's presence. "Stay here and don't touch anything." "And I mean anything." The door slammed behind her, leaving Emma alone in the apartment that never felt like home. Emma changed into her only other dress, carefully hanging the milk-stained one to dry. She knew better than to use too much water or soap as Chandra monitored everything, from the electric bill to the toilet paper rolls. Every penny saved on Emma's care meant more money for Chandra's cigarettes and lottery tickets. An hour later, restless and hungry, Emma made a decision that would change her life forever. She slipped out of the apartment and wandered to Monroe Park, the only place in their rough neighborhood where she could pretend to be just another kid playing on swings instead of a child carrying the weight of the world on her narrow shoulders. The park was nearly empty except for an elderly man feeding pigeons on a bench near the pond. He wore an expensive-looking suit that seemed out of place in their forgotten corner of the city, but his kind eyes and gentle demeanor drew Emma closer. She sat on the grass nearby, watching the birds fight over breadcrumbs with the intensity of gladiators. "They're quite the characters, aren't they?" the man said softly, his voice carrying a warmth Emma hadn't heard in years. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Adults usually meant trouble, questions she couldn't answer, or worse they might send her back to Sandra. "I'm Henry," he continued, scattering more crumbs. "I come here every Tuesday to feed these fellows. They've become quite demanding, actually. Last week, this fat one here," he pointed to a particularly plump pigeon, "followed me to my car." Despite herself, Emma smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," she whispered, the sound barely audible above the cooing of the birds. Henry continued talking, sharing stories about the pigeons as if they were old friends, and slowly, Emma found herself relaxing. When he offered her half of his sandwich from a brown paper bag, her stomach growled so loudly that both of them laughed. "When did you last eat?" Henry asked gently, and something in his tone made Emma's defenses crumble. "Yesterday morning," she admitted, then quickly added, "but it's okay. Chandra says I eat too much anyway." The change in Henry's expression was subtle but unmistakable. His kind eyes hardened, and Emma immediately regretted saying anything. "Who's Chandra, honey?" "My stepmother. She takes care of me." The lie felt heavy on Emma's tongue, but it was the story she'd been coached to tell. Henry was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma's too thin frame, her carefully mended dress, the way she flinched when he moved too quickly. As one of the city's most successful businessmen, Henry Morrison had seen poverty, had donated millions to various causes, but seeing it up close, embodied in this fragile little girl, struck him in a way that boardroom presentations never could. "Would you like to come with me to get some proper food?" he offered carefully. Emma's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and terror. "I can't. Chandra will be angry if I'm not home when she gets back." "When will she be back?" "She didn't say. Sometimes she's gone for hours." Henry made a decision. "Let me give you my phone number. If you ever need help, anything at all, you call me. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, memorizing the numbers he recited. Something in his voice told her this wasn't just polite adult talk, this was a lifeline. They parted ways, but Henry couldn't shake the image of Emma's haunted eyes. That evening, he made some calls to social services, carefully describing his concerns without revealing too much. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, but they began to turn. 3 days later, Emma sat huddled in the corner of the kitchen, her back against the refrigerator, watching Sandra rage about the missing food. Emma had been caught taking an apple, just one apple from the bag Chandra had left on the counter. "You think you can just take whatever you want?" Chandra screamed, her face flushed with anger. "You think you're special?" Emma shook her head frantically, but Chandra was beyond reason. She grabbed the gallon of milk from the refrigerator, her movements sharp and deliberate. "Maybe this will teach you about consequences," Chandra snarled, raising the container above Emma's head. The milk cascaded down like a waterfall of humiliation, soaking Emma's hair, her dress, pooling around her on the kitchen floor. The cold liquid stung her eyes, filled her nose, made her gasp for air. But worse than the physical discomfort was the crushing weight of helplessness, the knowledge that this was her life, and there was nothing she could do to change it. "Stop!" The voice cut through the kitchen like a sword, commanding and furious. Sandra whirled around to see Henry Morrison standing in the doorway. Having entered through the apartment door Emma had forgotten to lock. His face was a mask of controlled rage, his usually gentle eyes now blazing with protective fury. "Get away from that child," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of man accustomed to being obeyed. Sandra's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Who are you? You can't just barge in here." "I'm the man who's going to make sure you never hurt this little girl again," Henry replied, pulling out his phone. "I've already called the authorities. They're on their way." Emma couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't believe that someone had actually come for her. The milk dripped from her chin as she stared at Henry, this man who had remembered her, who had somehow found her, who had arrived at the exact moment she needed him most. "You don't understand," Chandra stammered, suddenly switching tactics. "She's difficult. She steals food, she lies, she's a hungry child." Henry cut her off, his voice like ice. "And you're an adult who should be protecting her, not terrorizing her." The sound of sirens grew louder, and Chandra's face paled. When the police and social workers arrived, they found Emma still sitting in the puddle of milk, but now she was wrapped in Henry's suit jacket, his arm around her small shoulders, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. The investigation that followed revealed years of neglect and emotional abuse. Emma's father, it turned out, had been arrested in another state for fraud and had never bothered to make arrangements for his daughter's care. Chandra had been collecting welfare benefits for Emma while spending the money on herself, keeping Emma in a state of controlled starvation and fear. But as Emma sat in the sterile office of social services, facing the prospect of foster care with strangers who might be just as cruel as Sandra, Henry made an announcement that changed everything. "I want to apply for emergency custody," he told the social worker. "And then I want to adopt her." Emma's head snapped up, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "Really?" Henry knelt down to her level, his eyes serious but warm. "Really? If you'll have me, I'd like to be your dad. A real dad who will never let anyone hurt you again." The legal process took months, but Henry was patient, visiting Emma every day, slowly earning her trust and showing her what love actually looked like. He learned that she loved books but had never owned one of her own. He discovered her talent for drawing, hidden for years because Sandra had declared art supplies a waste of money. He watched her face light up the first time she saw snow from the window of his penthouse apartment, where she would soon live. The day the adoption was finalized, Henry threw a small party. It was just the two of them, a homemade cake, and all the milk Emma could drink. As she blew out the 7 candles on her cake, Sandra had never bothered with birthdays, so Emma made a wish. She wished that other children like her would find their own Henry, someone who would see their worth when they couldn't see it themselves, someone who would fight for them when they were too small to fight for themselves. Years later, as Emma graduated valedictorian from high school, she would often think about that day in the kitchen, about the milk that had seemed like the final indignity but had actually been the beginning of her rescue. She thought about how sometimes the darkest moments precede the brightest dawns, how love can arrive in the most unexpected forms, and how one person's decision to care can change everything. Henry kept his promise. Emma never went hungry again, never felt unwanted again, never doubted that she was loved. And every Tuesday, they went to Monroe Park together to feed the pigeons, remembering the day their lives intersected and created something beautiful from something broken. The milk had washed away more than just innocence that day. It had washed away the old Emma, the one who believed she was worthless. In its place grew a young woman who understood that her value had never been in question, only hidden beneath layers of cruelty and neglect. Sometimes salvation comes with sirens and social workers. Sometimes it comes with a simple act of kindness from a stranger who refuses to look away. And sometimes, it comes disguised as the worst moment of your life, only to reveal itself as the first moment of something infinitely better.